Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to our fourth class on uh, microdata for macroeconomics and for structural change. We're really excited today to have Talip Kilic, who's the senior program manager of the Standards Measurement Study, which is the kind of the flagship household surveys run by the World Bank and used by macroeconomists and microeconomists worldwide. I've used these in a variety of papers. They continue to get better. They continue to add new features, new modules, and they're really an outstanding source of information for economists interested in development from whatever angle you want to take. So as in previous lectures, we're going to have the lecture per se run for an hour, and then we'll take some questions at the end. If you're a panelist, you can type your question right into the chat. Actually, if you're watching or a panelist, you can type your questions into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. Some of them will, I might write back or Yvette might write back and say, would you like to ask that at the end? Others answer as they're going on. So before we start, let me just make one announcement, which is that STEG has a variety of ways to help foster research among PhD students. We currently have a call for proposals. It's closing May 20th, and it's specifically for PhD students. So there's a link that's in the chat that you should be able to see. If not, you can go to the CEPR website and you can apply. You have kind of a month left. Please send us some good proposals. We look forward to reading them and selecting some of them for funding. Okay, so let's get started. Talip, why don't you take it away? Thanks again for joining us.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much, David, for the introduction. And thank you, David and Doug, for the invitation. I'm joined today also by my colleague, Yvette Contreras, who is an economist with the Living Standards Measurement Study. And it's really a pleasure to be with you today. And get to know a bit more of your perspectives and perhaps aspirations, demands from the LSMS, and hopefully for those of you that may not be as familiar, to introduce you a little bit to these data assets and pieces of knowledge that could hopefully help in your own research. So today's presentation will start with an overview of the LSMS. So I'm gonna give a very high level understanding of what we do and the key features of the surveys that are sort of supported and implemented by the LSMS. I'm going to take a bit of a moment to highlight some of the methodological innovations that may be of interest in line with some of the questions that we have received from David in regards to potential areas of interest, and this material will be pertaining a lot to the underlying work of developing methods and tools that are then scaled up in the context of large-scale surveys. And then in the last part of the presentation, we'll look forward a little bit. We'll discuss kind of this data integration agenda that is motivating us in terms of how to best position household surveys for better integration and use with other alternative data sources. And then for those of you that are familiar with our longitudinal survey programs that we've been implementing under the LSMS ISA project, we're now reconceptualizing and redeploying that particular program with a new name and an objective, which is Resilient Futures. And I hope to tease you a bit about that as well, more as looking forward ideas. Okay, so what do we do? So LSMS, as David said, is the flagship household survey program. So we have mainly two high-level objectives: strengthening household survey systems in countries with a focus on low and middle-income countries. And through that work, we aim to improve the quality of microdata that can in turn be used for research and policymaking. So LSMS was originally created in 1980, and at that time it was in response to poverty data gaps that bank really struggled in understanding and filling, and obviously poverty at that time and still remains as the key sort of development inspiration, right, for the existence of the World Bank. And our mission, and our new revised mission, is still is ending extreme poverty and boosting prosperity now on a livable planet. So the initial focus was on poverty, but then one of the pioneering I guess innovations of that time was to think about a multi-topic, multi-sectoral kind of survey instrument. So beyond poverty measurement, LSMS basically started promoting these multi-topic household survey questionnaires that basically allowed us to link poverty, well, generally speaking, consumption and income, to other aspects of monetary and non-monetary dimensions of well-being, including labor, education, health, social capital. And the idea there was to go beyond the measurement of poverty, but to understand drivers of living standards and the interrelationships between sectors, and also how they comparatively contributed to the reduction of poverty. So today's LSMS is organized around 3 work streams. So we have our data production programs, which again is centered around design, implementation, dissemination of surveys. And here we're primarily working on household surveys, but not only. We do also support farm surveys, firm surveys, as well as surveys on facilities, for instance, pertaining to health and education. Our second major work stream is around development of improved methods and tools for survey data collection and analysis. And much of this work is actually conducted through randomized survey experiments that test the relative accuracy of competing data collection methodologies vis-a-vis, I guess, closer to gold standard techniques that may not always be feasible to scale up. So here we're often moving on this continuum of improvement and oftentimes converging on second best practices that may be less costly to scale up and more feasible to scale up, and still results in more accurate data vis-a-vis prevailing standards. And thirdly, our group is still kind of dominated by PhD economists, most of whom have a micro background. As such, a number of us are involved in analysis of LSMS survey data for research purposes in areas that are primarily motivated by policy relevant pressing issues that kind of preoccupy us at the World Bank. So many of you may also be interested in this as you start kind of familiarizing yourself familiarizing yourself with the LSMS. We have different types of LSMS surveys. So, and I think this is sort of important because there are surveys that take on the name LSMS in which we're actually not involved at all, right? So they derive that inspiration from the origination of the LSMS in kind of implementing a multi-topic survey effort. So in that sense, we have LSMS-led surveys, which are sort of these national survey efforts and methods work under specific initiatives that are led by our team, often in partnership with many others. And in these surveys, we are very involved in the design, implementation, and all stages of basically survey work. There are LSMS advice surveys where on an on-demand basis, we work with different teams and national statistical offices through our work at the World Bank. And we provide various levels of technical assistance to these clients. And then there's LSMS style surveys where our name is used, perhaps, but we're actually not involved in, but they're using, these global public goods, the methods and the tools and the guidance that we disseminate, publicly to inform their surveys. Okay, so household survey is a complicated beast. So we basically cover all aspects of this work. As such, we have expertise that with different team members that touches on different parts of the survey cycle, from survey preparation through sampling, training of fieldwork teams, to actual implementation of the survey, the processing of that data, its analysis, and then public dissemination, right? Many of you are already perhaps familiar with this, but over the last 15 years, we've had a special focus on longitudinal survey systems under the LSMS ISA program, which I will have a slide on. And these surveys have supported 8 national statistical offices in Africa for the past 15 years in generating 30 plus face-to-face surveys that are publicly available, that have also informed subsequent high-frequency phone surveys, of which we've now implemented about 100 since the advent of COVID-19. Those data are also available. And as David mentioned at the beginning, these public data assets have fueled quite a bit of development research in Africa. And in fact, we could say in specific areas have really changed the landscape of development research vis-a-vis 15 years ago. So besides those data assets, we, as I mentioned, most of our work on methods and tools are for the purpose of improving the quality of the data. We don't promote those only in efforts in which we are directly involved in, but more broadly, and we do that through publication of these guidebooks on different topics of survey data collection. And these are then quite important for us in terms of broadening our reach and influencing household surveys more broadly. And just over the last 5 years alone, we have supported work in 78 countries across 6 regions. So very kind of a brief selected features of our surveys that may be of interest. So I'm gonna go over these features at varying degrees of detail, and feel free to come in with questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll have more time at the end to talk a bit more. So our surveys are, as I mentioned, multi-topic and multi-level, right? So multi-topic in the sense that we go beyond measurement of consumption and poverty, and we really try to think about these surveys as tools to study behavior, understand phenomena, and analyze linkages, particularly linkages that are important in raising living standards. So what do we mean by that? A typical LSMS survey, LSMS, I guess, led survey, they will have at least 3 different questionnaires. So they'll have a household questionnaire, an agricultural questionnaire, because of the importance of agriculture in particularly low-income countries in sub-Saharan African settings that we've been involved in, as well as a community survey. So these questionnaires, obviously, they're all multi-topic in scope, and they are collecting data at varying levels, depending on the outcome that we're interested in measuring, right? So at the household level, you'll have typical survey modules that you would need to be able to compute consumption and expenditures and income related aggregates, but you'll also have individual level modules on education and health and asset ownership, to name a few. On the agricultural side, again, depending on the outcome we're interested in measuring, whether it's at the parcel level parcel plot level, parcel plot crop level in the context of productivity measurement. You'll have varying degrees of intra-farm measurement of outcomes, and again, on a multi-topic basis. And for the community, this is a questionnaire that is then implemented in each sampled enumeration area in an LSMS survey, and it implemented on the basis of a focus group of community leaders and knowledgeable community members on specific topics. Now, a second feature kind of our surveys is that they are nationally representative probability samples. So obviously, we are very much mindful of non-sampling errors and sustainability in these discussions around samples. So these samples are not large samples, but they are generally designed to be representative at the national, urban, rural, and main regional levels. When we decide on the sample size, those simulations are often anchored in consumption expenditures as the variable that is driving our considerations. So these are smallish samples, depending on the country. I think the mode sample size will be between 3,000 to 5,000 households, but there are surveys that we have supported that will go above 10,000. For instance, in the context of Malawi, where district level representation is desired on the part of the NSO. And oftentimes, we try to position our surveys, and I'll have some examples of this, where this smallish sample through integration with other data sources and use of small area estimation methods result in spatially disaggregated estimates beyond the levels at which surveys are designed to be representative. Okay. A third aspect that has emerged to be more prevalent over the last 15 years with the advent of LSMS ISA is the panel, and we've been supporting these unique system of longitudinal surveys to improve the understanding of household and individual welfare and living standards with a focus on dynamics, and again leveraging multi-topic survey instruments, right? So LSMS ISA, for the past 15 years, we supported surveys that have now that are now classified as really a benchmark for national representative panel data collection in sub-Saharan Africa. So we worked in 8 countries: Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Malawi, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda. And since 2008, more than 30 face-to-face panel survey rounds have been implemented, over 360,000 interviews across Africa, and more than 6,000 publications that have used LSMS ISA data. So LSMS ISA, obviously, it's now a 15-year-old initiative, which actually is ending this year formally. And the origination of the LSMS ISA was very much tied to the food price crisis of 2007-8, and the recognition of that time regarding agricultural data gaps, particularly the dearth of data on agriculture in household surveys, and how agricultural data at that time had generally been collected in isolation from other sectors, right? So and it was really the LSMS ISA was really motivated by those weaknesses, and kind of focused on integrating agriculture into this multi-topic framework, right? So there's some there are many ways in which agricultural data in this multi-topic sense have been used over the years. I just picked one example that also can give you an idea about the extent of ag data that has been collected through these household surveys, which is the work we've done on gender differences in ag productivity, which before we'd done that work, in the context of Africa, had largely been informed by subnational non-representative studies, right? So with LSMS-ISA and with plot level survey data that identified managers of specific plots, productivity outcomes on those plots, we can actually, we were able to demonstrate how the gender differences in ag productivity at the plot level varied quite considerably from 24 to 66% across these countries, and also with significant variation within these countries. And then there were subsequent work that have also showcased the implications of the persistence of these gaps from a perspective of loss in ag production and also GDP. So this work obviously also allowed us to decompose these productivity differentials. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with these Oaxaca blinder type of decomposition models, where we could actually look at drivers of gender differences in ag productivity, where we can actually point on a cross-country basis how lower levels of fertilizer, labor inputs, and high-value crop cultivation on female-managed plots, and also lower returns to these inputs were really at the heart of the observed gender differences that we were seeing. And most of this work then was distilled in this special issue. And throughout the presentation, I have this kind of these assets, these images, and you can click on them and it will take you there. So after the lecture, you can consider doing that. And we've also then distilled this special issue into a report that we generated with the One campaign. I mentioned, multi-topic, multi-level aspect of our work, and that really lends these surveys to be multi-purpose, right? So they can be used for not only monitoring indicators but for rigorous research. And we've also seen in the recent years that they've been used for large-scale kind of impact evaluation purposes. So a few examples of that are tied to our partnership with USAID and their Feed the Future program, where we've been leveraging basically LSMS-ISA panel survey infrastructure to also collect basically Feed the Future relevant information in our surveys and complement our surveys with oversampled household surveys in specific geographies in our countries, together with our panel operations that kind of define the zone of influence for the Feed the Future program, and with the idea of basically this the existing panel sample providing a control sample for the Feed the Future impact evaluation purposes and the quasi-experimental impact evaluation efforts that they then conduct to in turn report to U.S. Congress regarding their impact. So for that work, obviously, it necessitated adjusting our questionnaires to collect a bit more information that are relevant for their purposes, but also oversampling in their zone of interest to complement the national survey sample that we were interviewing for our survey. Another thing I would highlight for those of you that are interested in the data integration agenda, our surveys are georeferenced and interoperable with other data sources. So the main way in which we pursue this is through georeferencing. So household dwelling locations are georeferenced, which enables integration with third-party geospatial data. We use common administrative frames as such that kind of the administrative breakdowns that we use to identify household locations can then be useful in merging our data with other administrative and census data. And then, we include common questions vis-a-vis censuses that are conducted in these countries so that we can pursue survey the census imputation efforts, for instance, for small area estimation purposes, primarily for poverty. So just an idea of some of the geospatial variables that we disseminate with our data sets that you could use to link with other geospatial information. First of all, in every kind of LSMS data set, we include a random offset EA coordinate. And this one follows the methodology that the demographic and health survey team had originally pioneered and still implement. And we average these household level, precise coordinates at the EA level, and then we apply a random offset between 0 to 2 kilometers in urban areas and 2 to 5 kilometers in rural areas. And we have some more recent research that basically looked at whether this spatial anonymization, in the context of merging climate data with our survey data to understand the impacts of climate on agriculture, actually affect any of our analysis. And we have some work showing that this spatial anonymization actually does not come at the cost of accuracy. But actually, we have some other follow-up work that will be focusing on how these estimates vary by the choice of the remote sensing product we use. Not so much about the spatial anonymization. So more care needs to be exerted in that area, in the choice of the remote sensing product, rather than the preoccupation with the spatial anonymized survey data. We also, in addition to those kind of spatially offset coordinates, we do disseminate in-house computed geospatial variables that are commonly requested by our data users when they're interested in computing, merging household survey data with other geospatial data. And I included a list here, but they span domains of distance, climatology, landscape, measures rainfall, soil and terrain, as well as phenology. With basically because of the specific interest in agriculture in particular over the last 15 years. Okay, and the adoption of georeferencing, beyond the generation of these geospatial variables, also has fueled quite a bit of research on the impact of extreme weather events on agriculture and livelihood. So and the way we've done that is to merge georeferenced household and plot locations with other geospatial data on climate. And in some of the more recent work, also getting hold of the WFP aid data to understand to what extent basically aid distribution in response to extreme weather events work towards mitigating the adverse effects on households. And actually, these research studies are all tied to the floods of 2014-15 in Malawi and the subsequent 2015-16 drought conditions that followed. And still Malawi is facing annual hazards in relation to climate that these panel survey systems actually continue to be relevant for in terms of being linked up with other geospatial data to follow up on this work. We've also done other more recent research that basically try to understand how surveys should be integrated with satellite data to provide us with high resolution estimates of crop area maps, which is basically something that countries often are interested in deriving, but the surveys can't deliver because of the sample sizes we use and the level of representation that are desired by countries. So we are interested in this question on how surveys can enable satellite-based methods to derive more precise estimates of maize area, more precise estimates of area under cultivation, and productivity outcomes. So we've done that in recent work, and I will also show you some of the resulting maps that we produced that you could access. So some of this work is sort of very much oriented around how survey data should be collected and the attention we need to pay to that because of the downstream implications of using basically inferior data for data integration applications. So in this work, actually, as part of this comparative assessment and then thousands of basically iterations that we were able to run in the context of Mali and Ethiopia, and under different regimes of basically survey data collection that we could simulate, we could showcase that completing a complete plot boundary is preferable to other competing approaches to georeferencing plot locations. We see this seemingly small erosion in, like, for instance, maze classification accuracy under like different modeling approaches that use different types of approaches to georeferencing plot location, and we can see that even those maze accuracy, classification accuracy measures are fairly similar to one another on the aggregate comparisons of the high resolution rasters of crop area under cultivation that are produced under different scenarios, and vis-a-vis less preferable approaches to georeferencing, we could see that the total area under maize cultivation is largely overestimated, and by about 8 to 24%, depending on the method we use. So we also showcase second best efforts. So if you can collect the boundary, you can collect a complete set of plot corners, and we can actually achieve the max classification performance with only 60% of the training data, because this is also one of the recurrent questions in this domain. How much survey data do we need? How much training data do we need for these models to work well? And there's a few other
Doug, is it just me or have we lost Talip?
research effort. Yes, David, sorry, did you want to come in?
I did. I lost you there for a minute. Maybe could you turn your camera off to save on bandwidth? I lost you
Okay.
there for 20
Okay, so
seconds.
let me do that. Sorry.
Thanks.
Okay, I may try switching it on in a little bit. So let's see. So yeah, so these are accessible on Development Data Hub, the World Bank Development Data Hub, if you wanna check it out. I wanted to touch on another aspect of our surveys, which is around food and non-food consumption measurement. And here the idea is having comprehensive modules that can enable us to create total household consumption aggregates, which are then used for poverty measurement purposes, but we're not going to talk about that today. The principal thing I want to highlight is, survey design matters for food consumption measurement. And there's some additional ongoing work on intra-household consumption measurement as well as non-food consumption measurement that we're not going to go into detail today, but I wanted to mention it as an area of continuing interest for us. So on food consumption data collection in low and middle income countries, there are two. So this is the big kahuna. So we have two competing methods across countries. Some countries use a diary, some countries use a recall, and obviously there are different preoccupations, concerns about one or the other. On the diary, there's concern that there's concern around respondent fatigue, whether people actually keep fulfilling the diaries in relation to their food consumption. And on recall, obviously we're concerned about telescoping. kind of we're interested in a specific recall period, whether they're actually consistently reporting, within that recall period, and also related to that, whether they're omitting anything, right? Because they are relying on recall. So to explore these questions very rigorously, a number of survey experiments have been implemented, right? Comparing diary versus recall-based approaches over the last now, coming up on 15 years. And on a cross-country basis, the research broadly points to basically equivalence of recall, in particular 7-day recall vis-a-vis a well-implemented diary. And this is in the context of poverty estimation, and obviously that's
Talip, I think we've lost you again.
Yeah, I think so.
okay. Can you guys?
Now we can hear you. We lost you completely there for
Excellent. Okay, so I'm not sure what happened there, but can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So another thing that I wanted to mention.
Talib, sorry, we see kind of a slideshow thing.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
Meaning that the screen is only part of what we see. We saw these buttons and stuff instead.
Oh, okay. Just one second. Sorry for that. Is this the one? Okay. How about now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Sorry for that. Normally my internet is stellar, but I'm not sure what's happening today. So the other aspect of data collection, which I will briefly mention, is this reliance on non-standard measurement units for consumption data collection. And this is not a very straightforward choice to make, and maybe not an obvious one for many people, but for much of the world, people are still not using standard units, kgs, liters, milliliters, to define their consumption. And we do need to think about, working with the respondents and what they're most comfortable with in capturing their food consumption, which often relies on non-standard measurement units, right? So allowing for that has been fairly common in our surveys, which means that we are creating these photo aids that show different items that are paired with different units of varying sizes. For instance, think about a heap of tomatoes that may be expressed as a small heap and a medium heap and a large heap. And then we have other parallel efforts that aim to create conversion factors for those non-standard measurement units that are then used in the ex-post analysis stage to measure food consumption. So and some of this, these are some examples of the photo aids that we're using. So we're going to, a great deal of detail to, understand the context in which food consumption actually happens in the household. And this is also distilled in this guidebook for those of you that are interested. Okay. Next up is individual disaggregation. I wanted to touch briefly on this, and obviously, traditionally, we have collected data on health and education and labor, going back to the origins of the LSMS at the individual level. And in the recent past, we have really started increasing the focus on conducting individual specific interviews, with a focus on asset ownership and labor in particular, tied to the emerging international standards on these topics. And here the idea has been to get the person that you're supposed to get because they are most knowledgeable about their own life and limit the reliance on proxy respondents, which is still very common in household surveys. For instance, it's also very common to interview one person for the entire household for everything and about everyone, which is something we need to we avoid. So in general, depending on the module that is being administered, it's always the most knowledgeable household member that the survey teams are instructed to get, right? So for individual level data collection and the recent efforts in the past, so I'll highlight this particular project on LSMS Plus, and here we try to operationalize emerging best practices on data collection on asset ownership and employment. So we did that. We showcase that in six countries, and here we try to interview everyone in private, all the adult members, 18 and above. We try to match the genders between the interviewer and the respondent, and we, as much as possible, we try to conduct those interviews simultaneously. So we really did things anti-business as usual. And quite a bit of this work then provided further motivation for follow-up work that is happening under this Strengthening Gender Statistics project. But this is just a very quick overview of these 6 surveys: Malawi, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Cambodia, Nepal, and Sudan that we've supported. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of emphasis on collecting individuals' ownership of different assets. So that's a very common theme across different surveys, which is obviously very business as usual, because typically asset ownership has been collected at the household level. But then there, depending on the survey, there were other topics that were individually disaggregated as well, principally, on a cross-country basis, employment, but not only. So a number of research papers have been put out there based on these data that sort of reveal not only the gender gaps, say in asset ownership and in labor market outcomes, but consistently highlight the importance of private interviews while we're collecting self-reported data, right? And the importance of reducing the reliance on proxy respondents, which we're now more consistently and more rigorously promoting in our survey. So I included a few slides here. I'm not going to delve into it, but this is sort of the follow-up analyses we've done on individual disaggregated asset data collection that basically provides us with a more nuanced understanding of inequality at the individual level, and consistently we see higher measures of inequality based on individual specific wealth aggregates vis-a-vis, say, household per capita expenditures or household per capita wealth. So I'll skip these slides, but you can sort of check them out later. We have some notes on those as well. And there's quite a bit of guidance we have produced and, following up on this work and the lessons learned on how individual level survey data should be collected, right, in the context of household surveys. And these resources are, again, influencing what we do downstream in terms of the advice we provide and the surveys we support. Reliance on computer-assisted personal interviewing has been very, very common, particularly in the last 10 years. And in my unit, we're also responsible for developing the survey solutions, computer-assisted personal interviewing software. It's not only used for CAPI data collection, but also for phone interviews and web interviews as well. It's free, and it's also open source. So I invite you to check that out. And obviously, there's many benefits of CAPI that we have leveraged over the years, and survey solutions have now been used across the world, and also specifically in the context of national statistical offices that we support in low and middle income country settings. There are many nice features that we can talk about, but this, from a survey management perspective, is of interest to us, where we can in real time track the progress of fieldwork. And much of survey solutions actually is beyond just survey data collection, but survey management as a whole. So we can actually track movements of field teams, interviewers vis-a-vis the expected field workflow and the work plan. We also derive very precise insights about what it takes to collect data at the household level, and also from different individuals. So the survey solutions software, it basically records for every interview, every event that happens on the tablet screen. So every time you click on something, it actually records that as an event. So this really a big data source, the paradata on the survey events, which we can then use to compute very precise metrics around interview duration, right? And some of this work, we put out in a recent paper, and we can also use it together with other budget information on the household surveys on what the average duration, not only what the average duration of a household interview is, but what that actually costs in different countries. And this is the type of information that is often desired by those that are interested in investing in household survey systems, or interested in conducting their own household survey systems, household surveys, but don't necessarily have access to this comparative information. So the last couple of things I'll highlight, one on objective measurement, and the other one on public access. So objective measurement has been increasingly a priority for us. And obviously I mentioned the use of GPS for georeferencing household locations and also for plot area measurement, but there are many other avenues that we've been exploring on objective measurement, specifically the idea of improving the accuracy of self-reported data. And there are a few examples here. Obviously using mobile phones for high frequency data capture, particularly for events that don't particularly lend themselves well to recall-based data collection, say in the context of extended harvest crops, or deploying sensors for high quality soil and climate measurement. We have some ongoing work in Uganda on this, and past work also in Uganda and Ethiopia, and also more recent work tied to our partnership with Standing Panel on Impact Assessment, SPIA program, which supported the use of DNA fingerprinting for objective crop variety identification, where we know this is an area where farmers don't actually know or can verify the variety of the crops that they're growing. And obviously that's quite important for tracking the diffusion of agricultural technologies, as well as understanding impact of adoption on productivity outcomes. And many past efforts have relied on self-reported survey data or other more aggregate information and trying to answer these questions. And some of this recent work have really shown the importance of objective measurement. So I included a few slides on land area that basically motivates why we're interested in GPS-based measurement of plot areas instead of farmer-reported estimates, particularly in areas where cadastral systems don't exist. Literacy, numeracy levels are low. And there are many other reasons why farmer-reported estimates are actually systematically off vis-a-vis GPS-based counterparts. And GPS-based measurement have now been scaled up on a cross-country basis in several surveys that we've supported. There's some research papers that back that work, as well as a guidebook as well. And last but not least, all of our data are public, right? So these data, you can access it on our website. The target release date vis-a-vis fieldwork implementation is 6 months. The maximum time it would take is 12 months vis-a-vis the end of the fieldwork. They are available on the Microdata library, World Bank Microdata library, which is again open and free. You do need to create an account for it, and then you log in, and then you can search for an LSMS survey of interest, and you'll notice that many of these surveys are documented similarly because they're subject to a metadata standard that is enforced across the board, and the file structure will correspond to the questionnaire modules and the variable names to the question numbering. Okay. David, how am I doing on time?
So you have about 10 minutes, but if you wanted to do a little bit more or less, I think that would probably be okay.
Okay, sounds good. So let me try to wrap it up in about 5 minutes. So
Right.
I won't have a lot of time to go through this in full. So there's quite a bit of resources that are embedded actually in the presentation slides. And I wanted to mention very quickly some of this methodological, innovations that we're spearheading as part of the LSMS, again, for the purpose of scaling them up in the context of large scale household surveys. So I included a bit of work, a recent work on time use, where we've actually again preoccupied with the accuracy of recall in people's recalling of their daily activities, but dearth of evidence on why recall should be the preferred method, or how it actually affects time use data accuracy. And obviously time use data are such fundamental to understanding economic decision making, and obviously highlighting different inequities both within and across households. So what we did in Malawi, this is a fair, and we presented this actually just at the end of December, and there's also that seminar pre-recorded if you want to check it out. But we implemented this effort where we developed a smartphone app, and it was a randomized controlled experiment where we had a 24-hour recall arm, and basically in parallel, we implemented this smartphone pictorial time use diary with the idea of basically comparing, recall to smartphone, and quite a bit of effort went into creation of this app, and also this field work, which involved intra-household data collection from both men and women, and kind of continuous data collection in these sampled communities for over 10 days. Okay, so the working paper is there. So this is just to tease you with the app. So this is how the app looks like. We enhanced an existing app for this study that was originally developed about 5 years ago. The app permits you to record time use in real time, and basically for the study, we made sure that these pictorial depictions were gender specific. So different respondents received different phones that depicted activities in accordance with their with their gender. But the activity list was common for both men and women. And we also had scrolling captions as well in this pictorial diary. So this is what it would look like. So they would scroll through the app. They will select the activity that they're currently doing, and obviously because it enables simultaneous recording, they can select another activity, and as you can see on the right hand side on the calendar view, you will capture both of those activities. So what that research has shown us actually, the participation rates in different activities were significantly greater in the smartphone arm vis-a-vis the 24-hour recall diary, but the reported time estimates for the 24-hour recall were consistently higher because of this minimum 15-minute increment in which activities can be reported, which is a very traditional feature of these diaries. Under the smartphone, we see gender gaps in unpaid work still remain large. We capture these interesting bits in the smartphone data, particularly for women, where they clock in more time in the evening, whereas in the recall data, nothing shows up significant after 6 p.m. And partly that may be related to respondent fatigue as they're going through this recall-based instrument. And we definitely also pick up more multitasking, right? So the overall work burden actually, in terms of multitasking, is a lot greater for women, according to smartphone data. So I'm gonna skip some of these slides. We talked about crop yields, but talk a little bit about the data integration agenda. to say that this is an area where we're actively thinking about because there are more competing data sources vis-a-vis household surveys. There's obviously the increasing availability of satellite data. This is one example of the Sentinel-2 constellation where, through the European Space Agency Copernicus mission, we're now, receiving 10-meter resolution satellite imagery every 5 days for the entire surface of the Earth. So the question is, well, we have all this wealth of data. What can we do to fill data gaps? There are many, supposed advantages of these data sources, vis-a-vis perhaps surveys, because they're big, they're wide in terms of reach and scope. They're always on. They're very high frequency. They can be very disaggregated, right, vis-a-vis locations and individuals, and in some sense they may be potentially less biased because they are less prone to social desirability bias, right? That we may be concerned about in household surveys. So here are looking forward, the way we want to position our surveys is kind of facilitating integration more seamlessly to enhance the analytical value and cost effectiveness of our surveys. We want to make sure that these AI-powered insights, when they're applied to populations that they've never seen, actually do provide accurate insights. And for that purpose, we can serve this calibration and validation role through the household surveys. And obviously, through this integration, we want to enhance the spatial disaggregation and the temporal frequency of specific indicators that current survey operations are not always well placed to serve. So we have a few examples that motivate this work, why we should use calibration data, right, for remote sensing models, and some of the results of how this data can help us from both reporting as well as a policy perspective that kind of keeps this agenda very high on our list. So I'm going to take 2 more minutes, David, and then I'm going to stop at noon. So I just want to share an exciting initiative that we're beginning to work on, which relates to the next phase of our program on longitudinal surveys, which we're calling Resilient Futures. So this will be a program that we hope to launch by the end of this year. So hopefully it will be operational in 2025. And much of it is really motivated by the data and the knowledge needs of the post-crisis era, where we're seeing intensifying and more recurrent crises on the climate side, on fragility and conflict, on the health side. We know that boosting the resilience, this capacity to be able to anticipate, absorb and recover from shocks, particularly among the most vulnerable, is important in raising living standards in this era. We do need to look beyond consumption and income. So this is an agenda that a multi-topic platform such as the LSMS is actually well suited to. The problem is that the current data landscape is quite inadequate, and we do need a shift in our data paradigm, particularly to be able to provide the timely support, right, in the context of increasing shocks. We do need these agile systems that are pre-established and can also be revamped in response to those shocks. And unfortunately, none of those systems are the norm, and most countries lack the capacity and resources to develop them. So for the future, looking forward, what we're trying to do, and I will leave this up, to set up these systems, the types of systems that LSMS ISA started establishing, but with a revised objective to boost crisis preparedness and strengthening resilience, particularly in countries with high levels of socioeconomic and environmental vulnerability. And most of that is going to be centered around these longitudinal high-frequency LSMS type surveys that are then implemented to capture both levels of and changes in resilience and vulnerability in their multiple dimensions. And we're just now starting the stakeholder engagement. across the World Bank with different bilateral development organizations, partners from the academia to help inform the conceptualization of this program. And looking forward, we're excited to build on the LSMS ISA legacy and foster resilience on a livable planet. So thank you again for the opportunity. So back to you, David.
Great. Thanks so much, Talip, for that excellent lecture. Thanks, Yvette, for helping out so much with the Q&A. There was lots of questions. Once we got into specifics about what you're collecting or not, the questions kind of poured. So we have time for some questions now. So I'll just call on people, and you can unmute and take it away. Momita, do you want to start?
Sure. So my question was mostly around like migration data, really. I wanted to figure out like what kind of migration data you collect, and if you have like a time dimension to it, like is it like temporary or permanent migration that you sort of ask about? Should I repeat the question, or did
we heard the question? I think what happened is we lost Talip again.
Okay.
Yvette.
Yeah, may I come in?
Yeah. What's up with your migration data?
So actually, it's one of the interesting topics that we have started covering in the upcoming rounds of the surveys, especially in the 8 countries that were part of the LSMS ISA. So in the last waves, we included some modules collecting information on temporal migration, seasonal migration, and also more permanent migration as well. But I will also want to highlight that even though in the previous waves we also have a set of questions that are quite interesting and helpful. But you may also see how some migration patterns with the distribution of the individuals that moved out of the households. So you may also want to explore that avenue, because we also collect information on the reasons why these individuals are not also in the household anymore. So yeah, there is data, but the most updated ones will have more detailed information.
Okay, thanks. Francisca, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Actually, I had 2 questions. So I think the second one was on time use. That was kind of answered already, so I'll skip that. But I was also wondering about the STEP skill measurement surveys by the World Bank, and if they are in some way being connected to the LSMS surveys, or if they can be used together in some way.
I think we have Talip back. Talip?
Hi, sorry. There's some weird thing happening with the Wi-Fi card on my laptop. So anyway, I'm connecting through my phone. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for the question. The short answer is no. So the STEP surveys and the other surveys are not actually connected. But skills-related kind of data collection actually has been an area of interest for us. So we've supported some past methodological research actually that was conducted by Karen McCord and Rashid Laj, and we can share some of that work maybe as complementary materials. But currently, skills-related data collection is not mainstreamed into LSMS style surveys. So we'd like to pick up that agenda again with our education colleagues, but there has been a period of dormancy, so we have not actually followed up on this.
Thanks. That would be great if you could share those resources.
Yeah. Okay.
Eleni, are you here?
Thank you, Talip, for the wonderful presentation. I'm just curious if we know already from which countries the data on intra-household consumption will be collected, or we already have the data for some of the countries.
So on intra-household data collection, so we have some ongoing research on this. So we don't have any plans to collect data at scale yet. So we have some planned methodological experimentation happening in Bangladesh, and that's basically one of the countries where previous research has focused in this particular area. And then there are other studies that had been kind of conducted in the past with data from Senegal as well as Bangladesh. So I can, I'm not sure if you are familiar with those studies. They're not with our group, but I'm happy to highlight them just in case they're not on your radar. So some of those data assets do exist, but not tied to the LSMS.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There were other questions on time use. Razan, do you want to unmute and if your question hasn't been answered?
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks, Talib, for the very insightful presentation. So I was curious about the time tracker app, and I had three related questions. The first one is that this has been tested only in Malawi, right? Has it been piloted in any other country? Okay. And the second one, I was curious how this app gets integrated in the, if someone's collecting a broader survey tool, could that be integrated in Kobo, for example, which is a tool to collect survey data, or is this data has to be collected separately and then exported to Excel or something? That was my second question. The third one, so I saw that basically the categories are more leisure, transport, unpaid work, and employment broadly. Are there any categories within employment? So, for example, productive tasks and non-productive tasks within employment, or this level of disaggregation has not been at least tested in the RCT that you guys worked on regarding using the app versus recall time?
Okay, so let me. Yeah, you're welcome. Nice to meet you. But by the way, sorry to those that I answered. So very quickly. So this app is installed on a smartphone that is then left with the respondent. So it's a completely respondent operated, right, data collection. Right. So it's basically something we deploy. We leave with the respondent. It's their diary, like to record their day as they go through that day. So now when we recover the data, it is in Excel, and we package it together with, like in that particular context, we use survey solutions, the survey solutions data that are then communicated up the server. So at that level, right before the transmission, the data are integrated, but not at the point of data collection because you're using a respondent to collect the data. Okay, so I hope that's clear. In terms of activities, actually, yes. So the paper kind of looked at broader groupings of activities when we were making these comparisons, but the activity list itself, I think, has about 56 different activities. So in that particular category that you are interested in, there are actually several activities that are included therein to capture different forms of work and employment, including on-farm as well as off-farm. So I hope that answers your question.
Talip, there was some questions that I'm going to ask on behalf of a few people that were asking about areas that are conflicted. Mm-hmm. And let me just make it more general, areas that have experienced some type of natural disaster and you can't get to. I mean, is there anything to do other than just downweight them and upweight other areas? What's your approach on those tough issues?
So definitely. So there's, I guess, two parts to that question. Like, what is it that you do when you are faced with undercoverage because you can't access specific areas because of conflict and natural disasters? So yes, to the extent possible, sampling weights are adjusted for that. But obviously, the sampling weight adjustments do not fully account for, say, different types of, fundamental differences that may exist between those subpopulation groups and others that you kind of capture in your sample. So there's a fundamental concern that sampling weights cannot actually fully account for. There's other things that you can do, like for instance, we did this kind of in the context of phone surveys. Like I'll just give an example, like phone surveys in the sense that we know not everybody has a phone, right? So not everybody has a phone, and in which case you can only call the people that have a phone in the context of COVID, for instance. This is how we did it. Now, if you have background information on people that you cannot call, then you can actually do that kind of non-response, under coverage adjustment more empirically when you're doing the sampling weight. So that's only possible in the context of a longitudinal survey where you have information on people you cannot access. So, which is different in a cross-sectional survey. If you can't cover certain areas, then there are certain adjustments you do for sampling, but they're very limited, right? For longitudinal surveys, I think those adjustments are a bit more credible because you have some information on people you can't speak to. Now, there are other aspects of that question, David. I mean, one is like, when the conflict happens, when the natural disaster happens, and you're obviously interested in what is happening to those subpopulations. And I guess the idea of resilient futures, I would tie to this discussion, because in areas where you can't immediately access through face-to-face surveys, if you have a longitudinal platform, you can try to contact them in different ways, right? You can also leverage a platform like this to commission, like when conditions allow, to commission face-to-face data collection with an idea of increasing the sample in those areas to basically increase your representativeness of those subpopulations. So longitudinal surveys can help for that particular agenda.
Okay. Let me throw in a very good question that was not asked actually, but it's related enough. So are there areas that just by definition are avoided? Like I've been told some urban slums are just, people's lives would be at risk going in there to ask surveys without the right permission. And I always said, no, in principle, these surveys represent, all parts of urban areas, but it'd be nice to have some backup.
Yeah, I think that, so I guess I can speak to my experience, like now coming up on like 20 years with the LSMS. I don't know of like, other than conflict, right? So other than conflict related events or like threat of violence, I'm not familiar with circumstances where certain areas are no-go that we don't actually cover. But I'm sure that these kinds of replacements, like basically enumeration area replacements, do happen. I mean, I categorically rule those out, and I don't think that they are always well documented. So I think this is a general question, maybe concern about household surveys in specific circumstances where these kinds of replacements do happen, but we don't actually always know. They don't. But in our experience, with other than like Ethiopia conflict, right? For instance, is a good example. We couldn't go to Tigray 1 year, and there are other areas in Amhara, for instance, we couldn't go to. So, or near the Somalia border. So that does happen.
Okay. So we're about out of time. So there are other questions we couldn't quite get to. Some of them were beyond the scope of the course, I would say. The good news is if you're interested in, for example, time use, there's going to be a whole other class on that. There were several other time use questions we couldn't quite get to. There's a whole other lecture on that coming up. I guess, Doug, we don't have another specific, there were other questions on migration's topic. We don't have a specific lecture on migration data.
We do not. That's true.
But I would say, I mean, it would be hard pressed to find data that, other than the LSMS, that are more directly relevant for, I mean, you have various types of retrospective and panel surveys, you see where people are. So this, this I think would be the closest we have to migration. I guess a topic was how do you aggregate, this is from my reading of the questions, how do you aggregate this data source and that data source? If surveys are of a few thousand people, it isn't really easy to just hope that by coincidence that you got the same people. You probably didn't. On the other hand, aggregating to the regional level, is something you can often do with the regional aggregates. I guess, Doug, we don't quite have I don't know if you could have a whole lecture around aggregating data sources. Some of it would be specific. A lot of those questions, there's no one size fits all answers. I'm just thinking out loud about, what else we can do and how we can follow up. But so if you have specific questions, and you're just totally stuck, you can email us and we may have some guidance on how to merge. So I like to say thanks again to Talip. Some people ask about the slides. The slides are going to be available. You can click through there. Yvette, thanks so much for answering questions by typing and giving the answers. Thanks everybody for coming. We have a whole bunch more classes coming up, and I look forward to seeing you next Friday. Thanks.
Yeah, so much. Nice to meet you all again, and thanks for your interest. And thanks, David and Doug, for the invitation.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks again.